coffee itself doesn't do anything. It's just the.
Correct. You can do that. Green tea is pretty beneficial, but if you can eliminate that, then.
I like tea.
Everyone here that needs to be here?
Mr. Zello's not yet.
Go with Marco. Paul's like, it's not my turn to watch it.
So you want to do a golf tournament at the end of the month? YOLO Firefighters Association?
Is that the one that's? Because Charlene, I think, bought a foursome for our department. Paul's doing it.
For the firefighter one?
Mm-hmm. And at least I think that's what it is. Here's the reason why.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May meeting of the West Sacramento area. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May meeting of the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Association. We'll start. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item is approval of the agenda.
I'll move approval.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded for agenda approval as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
None opposed, motion carries. Public comments on matters not on the agenda. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on such matters? Seeing none here today, we'll move on to approval of our April 18th meeting minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed, motion carries. Item 4, report out on closed session.
The board met in closed session to discuss with legal counsel anticipated litigation, and no action was taken.
Thank you. Review of monthly and year-to-date revenue and expenses.
Good morning, members of the board. I'll be reporting out on revenue and expenses for March of 2019. In Fund 870, the beginning balance was approximately $7.5 million. There was no revenue. Expenses were $12,000, and the ending cash position for 870 was $7.4 million. For Fund 871, the beginning balance was negative $13.4 million. Expenses were $603,000, and the ending cash position for 871 was negative $9.7 million. Looking at the year-to-date position along with the remaining advanced state funding, the combined cash position of 870 and 871 is approximately $13.9 million. As of May 9th, 2019, the agency's combined cash position is approximately $12.6 million. The agency trued up eligible costs through quarter 31, that's January through March, which will move $6.155 million from the advanced fund into Fund 871. Reported retention under the CFA is currently $11.3 million. West Africa and DWR are finalizing retention release right now for the North Area construction, which will reduce the held retention by approximately $2.06 million. That concludes my report. Do you have any questions?
Questions? I guess not.
All right,
So,
thank you.
Thank you, and we'll get a little more clarification here real soon. Fun stuff. So, item 6, presentation of a workshop on WSAFCA's biannual budget for 1920 and 2021.
All right, good morning, members of the board. Before I get started, I would like to introduce our new senior finance analyst. She's replaced Natish doing a budget for the city and also for Wasafka, and she's been here since February, and I missed my opportunity at public comment at the last meeting to introduce her, so we're very happy to have her here.
Welcome.
Did I say the wrong last name this time again?
I actually wasn't paying attention.
I wasn't either. It's Rebecca Robertson. I've worked with her for many, many years, and so I automatically go to her maiden name. So, anyway. So this morning, we have printed copies of the PowerPoint for you, so you can see it up close, and then we also have the big TV here, since our AV is not working from a power outage yesterday. So to start, this is a budget workshop. Jen, are you managing the, am I doing this? Okay. Gently. Okay, gently, got it. So, feedback. All right, so the Wasafka fund structure has five different funds. There are three here. The operating fund is $870. It includes the JPA operating expenses, all of the assessment revenues that come in. It covers debt service payments, distributions to the reclamation districts, and contributions to the city for the flood support services. Capital projects are housed in Fund 871. Those are funded by assessment revenues transferred from 870, as well as outside funding like state and federal reimbursements. Fund 257 accounts for the advance funds received from the state. We hold those, and then once we get, after we spend the money and we get approval for reimbursement, we are able to transfer those to 871 to reimburse Wasafka. It's very nice that we get to hold those, because that's where you get to see a positive cash position on the report that Jen just made. There are also two other funds, 882 and 883. They are debt service funds for Wasafka 2011 and 2015 bonds. And what happens is Fund 870 will transfer the money each year to cover those debt service payments over to the appropriate debt service fund, and then those payments are made. I will include those going forward in the report, because there are some reserve funds held in those accounts for the bonded debt service. All right. And then we have the City Flood Support Services Fund, 652. So as previously mentioned, this is where the staff is held, all the personnel costs. There are some minor operations and maintenance costs related to the city staff that provide those services. And then there's a general support cost allocation, basic indirect costs, city overhead that's applied to that fund as well. And that covers, as we went over in detail a few meetings ago, it's administrative expenditures related to the citywide overhead. It's payroll, HR, IT, finance, facility operations and maintenance, vehicle maintenance, those types of things. So the numbers are, of course, included in your report and also on the PowerPoint. The jump in staffing costs in fiscal year 19-20, you'll notice it goes from about 1.04 million to 1.1 million, and then down to 1.07 million. It has to do with an upcoming retirement of a long-term employee and the associated leave payoff. And what we've done is split the budget for that leave payoff so that we were capturing only the leave that's been accrued and the balance that is associated with SAFCA. All of the other leave balance that's on hand that will be paid out that was associated with prior city employment is budgeted in the city's fund. So,
Good.
All right. So looking at the details of the staff support that's provided in 652, we provided both the current FTE count and the 1920 FTE count, and you will see that that has gone down. One of the changes is that a senior analyst position that was recently vacated was fully charged to Wasafka in the past. we have actually reduced that and kind of reallocated based on what we expect this position to be doing in the future. And so that will have reduce the costs that are borne by WSAFCA for that. The other thing of note is the ICAP rate for 1920 has gone down. It was about 115.71% in the previous year, and we just got approval from Caltrans. It's 100.03% for 1920. So both of those also result in a net reduction in cost to WSAFCA. However, it should be noted that the city is in negotiations with a couple of bargaining groups and is also considering some changes for unrepresented employees, and so if those, or when those take place, then that may increase the base costs for labor. And if that happens before we come back for a final budget, then we'll be able to report on that. If not, we'll come back and do a report after the fact, just to make sure that you are fully aware of what's happening. So jumping into the WSAFCA Operations and Administration budget, this is housed in Fund 870. It has about 4 different categories of expenses. The first one is distributions to the reclamation districts, which total just under about $800,000 a year. There are other operating costs, like legal costs, lobbying costs, audit costs, et cetera. Those total around $330,000 to $340,000 a year. City support costs, again, this is the reimbursement to the city for the staff costs in Fund 652, any costs that were not charged out directly to projects. Those are estimated for 18-19 at about $436,000, reducing to $222,000 in 1920 and $141,000 the next year. And again, the reduction in 2021 has to do with the inflated costs in 1920 based on the retirement. And I wanted to note, too, that you see a significant reduction from 1819 to 1920, and that has to do with a change that we're proposing to how that staff is charged. So typically, the staff in Fund 652 will charge out their time to WSAFCA projects, and all of the other costs for the administration and everything else just remain in that fund, and at the end of the year, we do a true-up, and if there are additional costs, then we charge WSAFCA more to balance Fund 652 in the end. One of the proposed changes is to take some of those, the administrative, sort of not billable to project time, and bill it to some work orders that are specifically for administration. And I know Mark is here, so if I'm getting this wrong, he can provide more information. But by charging that time out throughout the year, it will actually reduce the amount of the true-up at the end of the year, and that way when you get updates throughout the year, you have a much better idea of what's going to be happening with the fund at the end of the year without a big surprise. So do you have anything to add with that, Mark? No? Okay. Let's see. Then we also have debt service costs, and so that's for the 2011-2015 bonds. Again, it's a transfer out to the various debt service funds, and that's about $2.5 million per year. You will notice, one thing I want to point out, that the O&M distributions on this slide, the $742,000 for 1819, it does not match the report attachment that you received. It's off by about $150,000, and there was an action that the board took previously to fund about $150,000 additional in work orders in 871, and that was put in the contributions to other agencies line item versus the interfund transfer line item. So that will move down. That's a funding for CIP, and so that's the difference that you see in that report. Also, as you just saw in the monthly report, Fund 871, the Capital Projects Fund, runs a negative cash position. That fund is funded on a reimbursement basis, so some of the project costs are funded by assessment revenues, some of them are reimbursements from the state and federal government. We would like to, and then it uses the cash from 870 and from the advance funding throughout the year. One of the things that we'd like to do, and you will possibly see in the budget that's presented to you in June, of course, depending on your feedback today, is that we'd like to calculate from the assessment revenues what we need to fund the operating budget and perhaps a reserve for any fluctuations in the true-up at the end of the year. I'll have to look back and see sort of what that has been in the last few years and make some assumptions based on our new proposal to charge out the administrative costs as well. And then move all of the other revenues that we receive into 871. That would allow for cash flows for the projects throughout the year before they receive their reimbursement. And it'll also let you know at any given moment what you have available for projects. So we'd love your feedback on that concept as well. And then moving to Fund 871, this is your capital projects fund. This is a listing of all of your active projects. It's got the total budget that's been approved by the board, our expenditures through April 30th, the remaining balance. So you can see what's actively being worked on, and of course you get a project update at the end of every meeting. There is one request for $100,000 for the North Area EIP closeout, and that is the only additional request at the moment. So, to summarize some of the changes and assumptions that went into the budget, as we do every year, we assumed a 2% increase in the assessment revenues. We actually have an 8.1% decrease in expenditures for 1920 and a 2.3% decrease for 2021, and that has to do with, of course, the retiree payout in 1920 and the changes in the FTE that are allocated to the Flood Support Services Fund. So we've reduced the authorized position list to 6.76 FTE supporting with SAFECA. Again, we talked about charging our direct administrative costs to work order tasks, thereby reducing the true-up amount and giving you a better picture throughout the year of what you can expect to see in your funds. We also talked about the potential change to transfer the unencumbered funds from the operating fund to the CIP fund to cover capital project cash flows. We are projecting net surplus, which is revenues minus expenses, of about $1.5 million in 1920 and $1.65 million in 2021, and so that could potentially be the amount that you see transferred in each of those years to the CIP fund, along with whatever balance that we have in the fund now that is not encumbered for operating or debt flows. And as I mentioned earlier, there are labor negotiations at the city level underway, which may impact staff costs for the flood program, but we would bring those back to you once we have more information. So that slide pretty much listed the types of things that we're looking to potentially change, asking for your feedback on, and of course, any other questions or feedback you might have on things that we didn't specifically ask for. So once you give us your feedback, we'll incorporate that into the final budget that we will present to you for adoption in June. So, do you have any questions or comments?
Ladies first.
Not working, there we go. Thank you very much. I think this is a really good news budget you brought to us, and I do appreciate having, for us to be able to see costs in real time rather than have a trip at the end. I think that's that's great for us, so I appreciate that, and thanks for explaining this in such a clear way in terms of how our budget works as well.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a few to get clarifications for myself. I think the idea of transferring the 870 excess funds, 871 is a good idea, and to incorporate that so we get a true view of what is. So we're going to show that in 871 is what, unallocated funds or something? Because right now you're showing that all of these, work orders and budgets and expenditures, so there will be something that's kind of unallocated or whatever term you use, right?
Correct. We're still working through exactly how that will be shown. We've also developed a little bit more detailed balance sheet report that we'd like to present to the board on a monthly basis to show you sort of what makes up the cash balance and the balance that we present to you. And so part of that will be showing the amount of money in the fund, what's allocated of the assessment revenues to projects, and what's available for projects. So we're still working through that, but if that's something that you support, then we would have more information and kind of show you what that would look like when we bring back the budget adoption, for adoption in June.
I think that's the right direction. And just so I understand the 257 account, which is the advanced funding from the state and others, and was talking with Mark just before the meeting, kind of how, there's a lot of true-up that has to go and happen before you actually show on paper the transfer, but are those funds available for cash flow purposes prior to those true-ups, or are they?
Yeah, that's why the state recognizes that small agencies and even larger agencies can't cash flow these projects, they're too large. the advanced program with DWR is kind of unique in that regard for a grant program. So the money is advanced, it's there to help our cash position, and the statement of costs and the true-up is the process by which we demonstrate that we've earned that revenue that's been advanced to us. So that's why GASB requires us to show it as a separate fund. But we look at it across all of our funds to get at our operating cash position.
That's
so
why we
keep
have
going.
that total at the end that shows
Yeah,
positive.
exactly.
On a basis, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, on the 652 fund, you're showing personnel, operation maintenance, and then the general support cost, that's the, the additional cost to house and supply the personnel and whatnot, and that's the 250 to up to 265 on an annual basis. I get confused, and it's been this way for years, how that relates to the ICAP. Because the ICAP, you have, an hourly rate, and then we have about 100% markup on that. And so you come up with a rate, which we use to charge to 871 projects. Do we also charge that same rate to 870 costs and stuff? Or that's where I get
Yeah.
a little confused there.
I toyed with including some of the slides from the last presentation because I figured one time going over that probably wouldn't stick. It's a very difficult concept. So to do it without visual aids,
Yeah.
652 is a city fund. And what the city does is there is citywide overhead, the city manager, city council costs, all different things that end up getting charged or allocated to all of the city funds. And so this 250 to 265,000 that you see here in Fund 652, that is the allocation of citywide overhead to the city's flood support services costs. Then, out of this fund, what happens is when staff in this fund work on WSAFCA projects, or city projects for that matter, they charge their time to that project, and the ICAP is added to it. It encompasses all of this, so that because the general overhead is charged to Fund 652, when staff in Fund 652 charge out to a project, they charge the ICAP rate to basically recuperate the costs for that general overhead allocation. So when we talked previously, the two calculations for the general overhead and the ICAP are very, very similar. There are several things that are not included in the ICAP. City Council is one of them. That is based on federal guidance on what can actually be included. But the purpose is, when we charge out to projects and we charge the ICAP rate, is to recover the amount that 652 is paying to the city for these overhead costs. And so by adding a couple of tasks and starting to charge out the administrative functions as well, it will recuperate some of those costs throughout the year versus having that big true-up at the end. So at the end of the year, what we would see is any of the costs that were not billable to projects but were really charged or should be charged to WSAFCA for administrative tasks, that was where the big true-up came at the end. And so by doing that throughout the year, the likelihood may be that you'd see in the true-up refund to WSAFCA or a very small charge to WSAFCA at the end of the year. And I'm hoping that made it clear, but this piece is actually the charge from the city to the city's fund, and then the city charges out to WSAFCA when they do projects and recuperate that through the ICAP into this fund so that we reduce the true-up at the end of the year. Does that help?
Yeah, I understand. The concept of, we have $1 million in personnel charges, and then we have general support of, approximately 25% of that. But then when we look at the ICAP, it's 100%. I'm missing something, I think, but...
Well, that includes a benefit rate as well. So when we charge out to projects, when you look at the $1 million, what's been charged out to projects is based on your salary amount, and then there's benefits added to that, and then there's an ICAP rate. The ICAP rate also includes it's a true-up. This is a process that we go through with Caltrans, and so it's a couple of years behind, where we calculate it based on the budget for 1 year, but we true up for 2 years prior. So whatever our ICAP rate was in 1 year, it assumes a certain amount of charge-outs and that we're collecting the money. At the end of the year, we reconcile that and say, okay, either we over-collected through the ICAP or we under-collected, and whatever that amount is that we over or under-collected gets added to the next year so that over time we recuperate the full amount. And so that's why sometimes you'll see the ICAP rate go up or down and potentially be a little bit more than what we're charging, or what you would see in a current year. Trying to think of what else is in the ICAP. I know Claire isn't here. We were looking at that earlier to make sure we understood everything that was in there. And it's something that Caltrans reviews and signs off on, and they send something back if it's not accurate. So
Okay.
I can certainly bring more information on that to the next meeting and look at, I did in the last time kind of go through what's in the general support allocation, but I can bring the ICAP as well, and we can look at both of those so we can understand what's in both of them, if that would be
Okay, well,
helpful.
I don't know if we need to do it at a meeting formally, if the rest of the board wants to, or I can get with you and I just want to get my concept. So it sounds like on this 652 fund where you list personnel, it's not just the true salaries and benefits, that number also includes some ICAP charges as well that would raise this percentage to a higher amount.
I don't think I understand what you are saying. There's no ICAP included here.
I probably don't understand my question, so.
Okay.
So I think we'll get together and learn through it. I just, want to hopefully understand this, going forward, so.
Absolutely, yes.
So.
Okay.
Chair Ramos, if I might add just a little bit, I think the personnel costs essentially are fixed, the various different cost categories for wages, salaries, insurance, and other things. And then the overhead and administration is also a fixed cost based on number of FTEs in the division and how that's allocated across the entire city. One thing to point out with the ICAP rate, or when we use the ICAP rate, is that is also partially reimbursable from the state through the granting program. So, regardless of what components are in the ICAP rate, and how that may compare to the overhead administration elements that are the same or different. The good thing is that for all of the time that we charge these projects, we get that cost share with the state 70 to 80% reimbursed, under the grant program. So that's one of the bonuses.
Understood. And
Using the ICAP.
And that's one of the processes we cleaned up over the last year or so, and it's helped a lot. And you're taking it a little further with this administrative charge-outs. So, that's the right way to do it, so.
Okay. And I will set some time with you so we can go over it
Okay.
in more detail with the people who really know what's going on.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay, well, we look forward to the final budget numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item 7, WSAFCA project updates. Mr. Gregg.
All right, so I'm going to go over a few of the items that are in your program update that was part of your package. Just call to your attention that our flood program management support services contract is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year, so there's an RFP that's currently out now soliciting proposals from interested firms to propose on providing those services going forward. And I've outlined the process in the item there. We should anticipate bringing an item back to the board next month for action. On the Southport levee project, the Phase 2 part of the Southport project, levee construction, a few of the things that are going on is on the real estate and right-of-way. We did receive an approval letter from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board for well installation and the monitoring work plan related to the Time Oil site. So that's something we'll be doing moving forward. Part of the project closeout, there's warranty work that is planned for a little bit later this year. I think we're expecting the contractor out end of the month to start some of that warranty work. Our consulting firm, as well as, or our project management firm, as well as AECOM, are working on the as-built plans. We're also working on an update to the O&M manual. And then we're also working on Borrow Restore. To support Borrow Restore, there's additional plans and specifications that are being worked on. There's a CEQA analysis that's being undertaken right now to determine if we need to do additional, get additional CEQA coverage and what that coverage might look like. Is there an addendum or a supplemental that needs to be done? We're also working with SRCSD at the Eco Restore project for use of borrow materials. So we believe we've identified enough material that would serve to restore borrow, and we're working through getting draft agreements with them now, and we'd also anticipate bringing back, hopefully in June, as early as June anyways, some actionable items related to those borrow agreements or purchase agreements. Even though there's, the material is free, I think the vehicle that we're going to use with folks over at SRCSD is a purchase agreement with a $0 amount. So those items should be coming next month. Then, and there's also some other stuff that's outlined in the report there about warranty work, and I think the weather may be inhibiting, but we expected one of the subcontractors out this week to remove some of the silt fencing and some of the project areas. I don't know if they're going to be out now with the weather the way it is, but that'll be progressing over the coming month as well. And also related to the levy project is the Board of Senior Consultants is going to come out for their final site visit and project closeout. We've set a date or a date range anyways, in September. We're looking at September 24th through the 27th to conduct that final post-construction safety assurance review. So that'll be, we'll be planning for that in the coming months. Then for phase 3, which is the restoration phase of the project, we've awarded a contract. Plants are under contract for growth at the nurseries. I think we've done one site visit at one of the nurseries. Things are going along well. We have another site visit probably planned in next month in June for the other nursery. And we've had, the pre-construction meeting was held yesterday with the contractor, who also came out and took a look at the site, to sort of look at site conditions and the layout in the field. So more information coming. We do anticipate later this, well, it really depends on field conditions, but later this summer or fall to begin that process of plant installation. Then with the federal project. So where do I start? I think we'll start with the 1043 pilot program and guidelines. The guidelines were issued early May. We've had a chance to take a look at those and review them. As written, it appears that it may be a little difficult for us to participate. The two criteria that's fairly clear in the guidelines is either they're willing to fund separable elements or the entire project. Our project as currently defined has no separable elements. We may be able to work with the Corps to define some separable elements. I'm not entirely sure what that process looked like or the time frame to do that, but that may be an option. It also may be an option that we move towards full project funding. It seems a little bit presumptuous to assume that the Corps would be willing to fund under a pilot program $650 million. And I'll talk a little bit later about what the proposed House Appropriations Bill looks like. That would be roughly the entire, or half of the entire work plan for the nation, to put that in perspective. So we're having ongoing conversations with the ASA's office. We're having ongoing conversations with district staff and division staff. Some conversations that were held, let's say informal coordination with staff at the ASA's office was somewhat encouraging. Don't count West Sacramento out. And we're going to be working through what an application process may look like for us moving forward. My level of optimism kind of tanked after the guidelines came out. After some more recent conversations, I'm beginning to fill up my optimism tank. I think there may be a path forward, and perhaps we can have an increment of our project or the next construction increment funded under 1043. Remains to be seen. The biggest, or the most pressing item is this June 10th deadline for commencement. So there needs to be a legislative action to extend that deadline. I think there's three options that are out there. Appropriations bill could do it, although feedback we received is that's highly unlikely that'll be a vehicle to extend that, that deadline. The most, I think, optimistic vehicle for extending the deadline is the next WRDA bill. There is a WRDA scheduled for this year, or 2020. So that would be the most likely vehicle to extend that, but that won't happen, you know, much later in the year, past this commencement deadline. And then there's a third option that's being floated around. I'm not too sure of the likelihood of it being viable, but it would happen maybe somewhere in between the appropriations bill and a WRDA, and that's a standalone legislation that's more like a cleanup bill that would maybe do some legislative corrections for this oversight. WRDA 2018 extended the deadline for which projects could participate under the 1043 program out to 2023, but it failed to also extend the commencement deadline accordingly. So some folks think that this might be included in that legislative cleanup bill that could correct that oversight. So more information to come on that. I think as the board is aware, the West Sac project had a line item in the president's budget for an additional $400,000 for pre-construction engineering and design funding for the Corps. We're looking at plussing that up through a work plan up to the full PED funding, which would be $3.6 million. So we're looking to plus that up by $3.2 million. As it stands right now, the pre-markup draft of the House Appropriations Bill looks at about $50 million for the investigations account over the president's budget. So that's where our PED funding could be plussed up. So there's enough capacity there to achieve that. If we thread the needle and are able to participate, you know, in a first construction contract under 1043, then we'd be looking at getting a work plan line item of on the order of $22.5 million for that first construction project. And the current draft appropriations bill has $1.17 billion over the president's budget request, plenty of capacity in the construction account to cover that first construction contract. Timing, of course, is going to be pretty essential on that, whether we can participate or not. And then the other thing of note in the draft bill is it allows for 6 new starts for investigation, as well as 6 new starts for construction. So that's a pretty good start. Hopefully it stays that way through the markup and also stays that way through Senate version and whatever final bill ends up being passed. So those are pretty positive. I think right now we're going to be pushing hard for traditional core funding in 2020 for the balance to complete PED. And then we're going to see about getting an application teed up and ready to submit if they extend the deadline, the commencement deadline. So I think that's our plan at this point. Before I move on to any of the other items in the report, any questions or comments on the Fed project and what we're looking at, or strategies or any of that?
So this plussed up money will, if it goes through and is appropriated timely, it'll go back to the Corps to add, to be distributed in a work plan.
Correct. And the Corps, based on previous appropriations bills and president's budget, the Corps has been doing work plans for many years. And so they basically have a draft work plan that has already been developed. And so the trick is going to be what can be sent up through headquarters into the ASA's office for recommendation for West Sac.
Okay.
Is it going to be additional 3.2 million, or is it going to be 22.5?
Yep.
You know, so, and include a new start construction. So that's going to be the trick.
On the new start constructions, are those allocated to different types of projects as they have before?
Yeah, so it's unclear at this point how many
Or flood?
of the 6 will be eligible for flood, new
Yeah.
starts.
Okay.
The one other thing that, and I'm going to follow up on this to see if this is the only rule when it comes to new starts, but typically, when there's been a new start construction awarded through an appropriation, through a work plan, let's say, the Corps typically has, at least in the past, 12 months in which to enter into a construction contract. So the Corps has been very careful in when they request construction funding so they can meet that obligation. And it takes some time for the Corps to first enter into a PPA with a non-federal sponsor and then go out to bid and actually get to a construction contract. Draft appropriations bill at this point, the requirement is execute a PPA within 12 months. Well, that's a much lower bar to achieve. So I'm having conversations with the district now that if that's the only bar that remains, that's the requirement for a new start construction, then that's a really good, perhaps it's a really good opportunity for us to get in now for that request. And, you know, I think the percentage of available funds in the construction account that would go towards our project is much less than the available percentage of funds for the investigations account, which is where we would get the balance of PED from. So there's much more capacity in the construction account. So I'm going to push for it, and hopefully there's a little asterisk there that allows us to participate in the 1043 program, should it be a viable option, you know, down the road.
Okay.
So. All right, so cap to cap just wrapped up. I'm not going to, well, maybe not most of, the majority of the board was back in DC along with myself, and many participated on the flood team, much as myself. The meetings that I participated in, Army Corps of Engineers, Senate Appropriations Committee, met with Congresswoman Doris Matsui, also met with the head of the National Waterways Conference, Senator Feinstein's staff, and representatives from the Office of Management and Budget. Generally speaking, you know, we represented the region on our regional flood issues, the projects that we have, including the West Sacramento project, and then the one other major issue paper was this leveraging non-federal sponsor participation and delivery of the Civil Works projects and through 1043 programs and other things. The one item of note that, which I thought was very interesting, when we met with the Office of Management and Budget and we presented our ideas on leveraging non-federal sponsor participation in project delivery, we're looking at this as if we work together, we can accomplish more things. We can get more projects done in a timely manner or in parallel, with parallel processes as opposed to serial processes, provide risk reduction sooner and, you know, be able to advance projects more efficiently. The gentleman with OMB said that's fine and that's great. I don't disagree with you. However, that's not what the administration saw was the purpose of the 1043 program. The administration's idea is there are folks out there that can do it better than the Corps. And we want to give those folks the opportunity to prove that they can do it better than the Corps. So this is not, their focus was really not a program that allows us to work together. It's a program that allows us to work independently and let's see who can do a better job. That was surprising to me, not totally surprising given this current administration, but it was unanticipated. I didn't realize that was the real push for this program. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. We still view it the other way, but.
Well, understand 1043 was developed prior to this administration. It's just kind of, you know, a new take or a new vision.
Look
for
at it, yeah.
So, you know, how it eventually develops and operates is to be seen, you know.
Yeah.
That's what, that was one of the other things that we advocated back there was, this is a pilot program. And so, let's get some activity so you can see, how it works and what it develops and what it would eventually become. So we'll see if we get to that point and if we participate.
Yes. Then lastly, I wanted to follow up for an item or request for additional information from the last board meeting related to the floodplain management plan update. I think it was a request for maybe a cost breakdown or cost sharing of that effort. So staff did an analysis. Overall cost to develop the update was about $37,000, for which the city expended about $32,000, and Wasafka staff in support of that effort expended about $5,000, so about 87% city cost, about 13% Wasafka cost. And our support was primarily geared around the 408 requirement to have an updated, plan, as well as our review of the products and providing feedback to staff that did a great job putting that together and taking it forward. So, any other questions about that? I'd be happy to answer.
Nope, that sounds good. Thank you.
That concludes my report. If there's any other questions the board has.
Questions? Okay. Thank you, Greg. Very, very complete. Keep on pushing. Director's comments. Any? Other than just a quick note on the cap to cap. You always wonder sometimes the value there, but when you get there and actually participate and you go to the meetings and you get in front of the folks, you see the value of keeping our presence there. And I think that combined with the more focused lobbying efforts and your more increased participation in working this federal program, I think it's going to bring results here soon. So let's keep at it. So with that, we're adjourned. Thank you all.